inspire.
Welcome back to Starting Now. I'm your host, Jeff Sarris. This is a show where I talk to entrepreneurs and creators of all types to reveal their unexpected paths to where they are today. Today, my guest is Luke Laurie. Luke is a phenomenal board game designer, and he's not only created a couple of my favorite games of all time, but he has built a platform for community. He has found his community both as a designer within his design community, but also within the customer base. And he's ever present on Facebook and Facebook groups, and he's always there to answer questions and connect with people who love his games. This was a wonderful conversation. We went way over time because there's just so much to talk about, and he's just an all-around just awesome person to have a conversation with. So without further ado, my conversation with middle school teacher and board game designer, Luke Laurie. So with everything that you have going on, being a teacher and whatnot, how do you fit in board game design? Because you are ever present. So Dwellings of Eldervale, extremely popular game, thriving community. You're there all the time. Like not I'm sure not all day, like you're working, but you're just accessible. You're an accessible designer in a way that I think a lot of board game designers maybe aren't. So how do you balance your time?
So it's partly not balanced.
Okay.
In some ways, you're always neglecting something. The thing is are you neglecting something that doesn't matter? So I try to make sure I'm not neglecting my children or my spouse or my financial obligations or my career. But I might phone it in on some of the things that people do spend a lot of their time and effort on. And I've always been a multitasker, and I've always been kind of a jack of all trades. And so I've had to shift and, move from one activity over to other activities and focus that attention to make some of those things happen. As a designer, I tend to get up every morning and design at about 6 a.m. Before I work, and I'm not on the clock for work until 8. And my brain can do math and creative work in the morning before I can talk. So
Interesting.
I can't really speak really well, and I haven't, the coffee takes a while to kick in, and but I can still do that creative work. I don't know, maybe it's like a half dream state or something like that. I tend to think of design ideas while I'm driving, while I'm biking, while I'm doing other things. And I'll just, I'll pull out my phone and I'll take an audio memo. Or if I'm in a circumstance where, well, I'm thinking of the old days, I'm in a boring meeting that doesn't really apply to me, and I have a spiral notebook, and I can be like, yeah, that's interesting, but this is more interesting. And if you can take down those ideas and then go back and do the work with it later, that matters. And sometimes just the act of writing it or recording it is enough for it to make an impact on the kind of the next step of the creative work.
Yeah, so you have a very regimented process then. If you're starting, is it typically every day you start working on some of the design for games, or is it hit or miss based on your inspiration?
Yeah, no one observing it would call it regimented. I mean, what is he doing? It looks like he's playing Hearthstone.
Research.
Yeah, he's making his coffee. I don't know. That doesn't look like work to me. So the reality is that the cycles of thinking and stepping away from the work, it's sometimes a grind, but a lot of times it's more like a series of crescendos to an idea that becomes committed, and then kind of a lull until the next one. And then it'll hit in these bursts. So sometimes I will come home from work, and I will have some ideas, and I'll get those down as quickly as I can. And my wife is also a teacher. She's a super dedicated elementary teacher, and she tends to work late And so while she's working, I'm working. I take my daughter to dance, and I might go for a bike ride or a hike or something, or I might work on my game design. It's almost always present. But there's also an illusion here. The illusion is that somehow I designed Cryo and Dwellings and Whistle Mountain all in this short amount of time, and I did it.
Yeah, they
Not
all
even
came out
close.
within what, 2 months of each other ish.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on where. Like Cryo hasn't officially been released yet, like
Okay.
in just a couple of weeks. But all of these games came out within, say, a 5-6 month span from like first copies being shipped and so on to present. But like these designs, let's see, these are probably off by a little bit, but Cryo started at about 5 or 6, or finished it about 5 years ago.
Nice.
Whistle Mountain about 4 years ago, and Dwellings about 3 years ago.
It is wild. Like patience, that's the more I've learned about this industry, it really feels like patience is a key to navigating it. Like
yeah, it really is.
That is a huge time distance between completion and distribution and really promoting it and talking about it. But then even when it comes to the game design itself, how much lead time would you say on those there was?
So when people ask me how long does it take to make a game, I will say 2 years, just design.
Mm-hmm.
When they say how long should I expect before it would be published, I say 4. And that has been close to the reality. There's always some kind of variance in that. And I talk to people who self-publish, and I do not self-publish, even though some of my work has been on Kickstarter by other people and other companies. I committed a long time ago to focusing on the craft and the art and the science of design, and leaving the business side of things to people who that's their passion.
Yeah, just like you said, giving away the things that maybe aren't bringing value to you.
Correct. Yeah. So I don't want to be managing all the shipments and dealing with orders and communicating back and forth with printers in other countries and so on. I love that other people are doing that. Now, the real money in board games tends to be on the publisher side and the distribution side. Designers tend not to get that lion's share of the funds. But on a big hit, a designer can do pretty well.
Yeah. So you've had some just amazing games. I mean, Dwellings of Eldervale right now, like I said, hugely popular. Like, it's an amazing game. Dwellings and Energy Empire are truly two of my favorite games just of all time. Like, Energy Empire was the first time I heard about you, and it just blew my mind. I don't know what it is. There's something about how the mechanisms work together it's very satisfying. Mm-hmm. With dice rolling that doesn't take away from the game in any way. It adds to it in something, because arguably people will say like, oh, randomness from dice, randomness from this or whatever, and they aren't as keen on it. But when randomness is introduced correctly, which probably, this is a question, there probably has to be some sort of randomness into any game. Would that be correct?
More or less, yes. So randomness doesn't always necessarily come from random number generators or random draws. Sometimes the randomness can come from the actions of people too. Mm-hmm. Even in a game where everyone has access to the same information, there can still be a degree of unpredictability about the path that the game will take. But there's all kinds of different stuff I could talk about in terms of like design philosophy that's gone into these different games, and seeking those fun moments, those exciting moments, those where you feel that sense of accomplishment or discovering a chain of events that will lead to you to feel like you're smarter than everyone else in the world. That feeling of escaping a devastating loss or averting disaster. Those kinds of things are the kind of things I seek out in games. And I know that when games tend to to move into more of the Euro side of games versus the American Ameritrash side of games, there's a tendency for some of the what we might call the fun factor actually to be reduced, where people are looking at the fun as in kind of a methodical solving of a problem, not necessarily the exciting moments side of thing. So I try to include that seeking of the methodical problem solving strategic aspects along with those explosive moments, those moments of crisis and those moments of victory, exciting moments, where you just pulled off something that no one thought was possible.
Yeah. And you mentioned a few minutes ago the art and science of board game design. And being a science teacher, how do you see that overlap? Because I do feel like there's a lot of, like you mentioned in the morning, you're doing design, you're doing mathematical work. What's the balance between sort of the art and the science or math of a game?
Mm-hmm. So when I started, and this may interest you as that you tend to be interested in things like entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
When I first got started, I didn't know what I was doing. I've always had all kinds of different mathematical science skills. I knew the math, I knew the numbers, and I had some experience with games. When you actually go to start making games at first, you kind of assume that certain things about building games will be easy, and that by doing things in ways that are different, just being different, you'll somehow stick out. But the reality is there's this balance between creating mechanisms and themes that have this degree of familiarity, where people sit down to a new game and they still feel attached to it when they begin. And then in comes subtly those differences, those innovations, where people are like, whoa, oh, hey, this is a little different. All right, I got to do this little thing. If it's so different from their experience, either through the theme or the mechanics, they won't be able to attach themselves to it. It'll feel too foreign, too alien, and it won't have that pull. If it feels too similar, then they'll just compare it to other things, and they'll say to themselves, I think I'll just go play Dominion. I'll just go play Waterdeep. This is just the same thing with different color cubes or something like that. But with regards to the science work, my prior education and so forth, so a lot of my early work went into Energy Empire, which draws from my understanding of the way we create energy and its effect on the environment, the different kinds of pollution that we generate, and how all these different factors fit together, and how almost everything that we do economically, industrially, and so on has trade-offs. And so the entire game, you're looking at how you work these various trade-offs. So that was drawn from my experience. And I do things like build spreadsheets of the numbers. I do use some degree of calculation, but the reality is a lot of my game design is more about heuristics and looking at kind of big picture feel kinds of things, in large part because most of my games feature some degree of engine building. Mm-hmm. And engine building very quickly becomes incalculable. You only have a sense for how much kind of growth in output and production that people are going to be able to pull off. And so you're looking at balancing things like the resource acquisition, the action efficiency, and you're looking at kind of how is this going to explode and what are the limits on that growth. When you focus on the limits, that's where you can kind of tinker and find that balance where you say, well, as long as no one's able to do more than this on a turn, and as long as they can't ever get more than this kind of resource, that's going to keep the game in check. And as long as they stay within that, that fence, we're going to be okay. What was your question?
No, I mean, that's perfect. Just the art versus science of it. And Then when it comes down to, say, your engine building, so that's for anyone listening who might not be into board games specifically, you may have like a deck of cards and you're acquiring different cards and building an engine in front of you where you're able to then achieve more like as the game progresses, and just it ramps up with time. When it comes to, say, individual cards or classes of cards, then is it still more of the big picture through play testing and through these heuristics that you figure it out, or do you have sort of a weight that you assign to different things in these spreadsheets where you're like, okay, I have 23 like weight 1, 17 weight 6, like whatever, something like that? How do you approach stuff like that?
Yeah, it's different with different games, and you're right that there are some degree of weights that I assign to things. So, for example, Energy Empire commonly has there are cards that cost between 1 and 2 resources. In money, it's a slightly different conversion, and then their average output is 1 resource. Which you can actually get that output on the same turn that you acquire the card. And then the card may or may not come with a liability in the form of pollution. So essentially the cards are built around kind of a factor it's like 1. The 1 being 1 cost. It's about 1.5 cost because it depends on where it is and in the market, and you have to decide if it's worth it for you. So 1.5 cost, approximately 1 output, 1 resource getting converted to 2, or just 1 resource output. And then if it produces more resources, it's more likely to come with that liability that becomes something you have to deal with later, which can cost you actions or other resources. So by kind of building all the cards around that kind of balance, and then recognizing that it's actually okay for some cards to be better than others. I learned that several years ago, going to some workshops where there's a discussion of balance when there's choice involved. If everything looks and feels perfectly balanced, you've actually removed choice from your game. So it's like if you have 10 flavors of ice cream that actually all taste the same.
Yeah.
And they're in different packages. Your choice doesn't matter anymore. So there has to be some variance. There has to be some difference, and not just in like different resource output, but some of it actually have to be better than other cards. And what's funny is once in a while people are like, why do they even put this 1 card in the game? This card sucks. And I was like, that's so that other card looks better. Did you catch that?
Nice. Yeah.
If they all looked good, none of them are good.
Yeah, seriously. And yeah, not to get in the weeds too much with all of the mathematics behind it, but I find it super fascinating because I come from a systems place. Like I'm a developer, like entrepreneur, like I build businesses and figure out the systems to make them profitable. Mm-hmm. And that's really where I spend all my time. So I've always wondered, because obviously every designer will have a different approach somewhat and whatnot, but I could imagine if I was designing a game, I'd very much have constant weights for things. I'm trying to balance the number of cards. And yeah, just throwing that in there and saying like, yeah, you need to have that, keep the agency with the player. Right. Otherwise, yeah, you're right. It's not going to be fun. Otherwise, then it's just a math problem.
Yeah. And some people love just a math problem.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that's where you get into like, every single game is going to have its fans and its detractors. And that's true of almost everything in life. Right. Oh, yeah. But, when you find a game that it's clear enough in its marketing and its theme and its presentation that the right people are drawn to it, that's when it works, because there's a market out there for all kinds of different games. And it's really important that when you buy a game, that you buy the game that's right for you and you avoid the ones that aren't right for you, so that in the long run, your game is going to look better. It's going to be more accepted in the market. There was something else I really wanted to add to that, but You go ahead. You give
Oh
me
yeah.
some more questions.
Well, and I was going to say, being a designer, do you find yourself like I know you got your start sort of with D&D and doing campaigns and different things, and then
Mhm.
um, like you've been sort of around board games for a while. I like to dive into origin stories. I think we might get to that just in a minute. But do you find yourself currently playing a lot of games, or does your game design, game development, and all the time within sort of your own ecosystem, is that the main focus?
Absolutely, the main focus is on the design
Mhm.
work, and so I've had some things I've really had to get done with a time frame. For example, we recently finished the first round of the draft for the solo rules for Whistle Mountain.
Oh, nice.
So solo Whistle Mountain is coming out really soon. We're working on solo for Cryo. And I began working on a new project, and I don't think I'm at liberty to speak about this one yet, but it might have a box about that size
Oh my.
by the time we're done. Maybe we can get it smaller, but it's another monstrous game. And this goes back to some things that I'd worked on several years ago also. But yeah, I don't get to play a lot of games. In fact, like I'll play little games on my phone, like between things and when I'm waiting for stuff. Board games in my household has dried up a little bit. My son's busy with college. My daughter's always dancing and singing and doing her theater arts. And I've really kept pretty isolated during all of COVID. Um, I played one game of Dwellings of Eldervale with developer Peter Vaughn many months ago after we first got the first copies, and I'm waiting because very soon I'm going to have a whole bunch of my gaming friends are going to be fully vaccinated, and I'm finally going to get back to playing games. I've had a luxury that I have a whole bunch of friends who are really like solid gamers and great at learning games, and they teach me games, and then I don't have to
Nice.
put in that energy to be the teacher. I can focus on learning the game, and and then absorbing it all, and then taking that back to my design work. But yeah, I do not play many games.
Yeah, and
So
do you arguably that could be like one of the big strengths too, because you have the fundamentals there. Like you understand all these different mechanisms and whether it's deck building or dudes on a map or all these different things, mostly that you built all of them into dwellings, really. I look at dwellings sort of as this ultimate game of covering all these different mechanisms in one, which I think is it's beautiful, like how it works together. Like, do you, since you started designing, have you found that you were playing games a little less, or maybe that things would influence you, or positively or negatively, when you're trying to create in your space?
I'm certain that I'm influenced by everything that I play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that said, sometimes I can be influenced by the idea of a game that I didn't even play. So I have pulled from games where I was like, oh yeah, that concept. And I just observe the game and I see how the concept works, and then I pull it back, and then I put that into my repertoire as things to draw from. I can't specifically think of an example right now, but I know there was something. I know I have put in things into my games that I know exist out there, and people say like, "Oh, that's like that one game," and I'm like, "Yeah, I haven't played that. Sorry."
Yeah.
But there's too many games
Mm-hmm.
too. There's just plain too many games out there for us to play them all, and that's a glorious thing. And it's also it feels it's a little bit of a letdown that there's all this great stuff, and I don't have the time to dig into all of it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a crazy time for board games, really, in the last several years, just how it's blown up and how many just phenomenal designs there even are, let alone
Mhm.
just the number of games across the spectrum. It's yeah, it's wild. Why do you think it, like do you have any sort of insight into why it's blown up as it has?
That's a good question. I know that Kickstarter is a factor. And I know that the ability of just about anyone to produce something, at least on some small scale, is a factor. Um, companies, come and go too. So sometimes it will be the ambition and the effort of a designer. They put out their first game, they self-publish, and they realize they didn't want to be self-publisher. And so then that company will kind of fade away, and then that designer might go and do other work. But I don't know all of the motives other than that the market clearly can bear it.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't necessarily creating a thriving environment for everyone. So
do you mean for the designer publisher?
I'm thinking personally from a designer's perspective, it's very difficult because you really, really have to make your work stand out when there's so many products out there. It's something akin to arts. It's like music, dance, poetry, and so on. There's so many people that are engaged in all of those different arts that if your work doesn't truly stand out in a way where you manage to capture an audience, it won't be profitable. So there's a whole lot of stuff out there that isn't necessarily profitable, but it is out there. It is on the market, and it can be consumed. I've been lucky that I've worked with either people who are really established or people who are really passionate and managed to make that happen. So I like to think that my designs are so good that they would have stood on their own, but the reality is that isn't true. I mean, Stones of Fate was a passion project by my friend Jeff Cornelius and his brother, and they put their all into it. They wanted to start their company, Cosmic Wombat Games, and their company managed to make another game, Campaign Trail, successfully, but they really struggled, and making it as a publisher is super challenging. Energy Empire was published by Minion Games, and James Matthews has since passed away. But this was, I think, his 7th, 8th, 9th Kickstarter, maybe more. He did some small Kickstarters in addition to his game Kickstarters. So he was pretty well known, and it was branded as a sequel to an existing franchise of a popular game, which did inspire my work, and so that helped. Then Whistle Mountain is Bezier Games, and everybody knows Suburbia, and everybody knows the Werewolf games. And so also established. Dwellings of Eldervale is Breaking Games, which does a lot of lighter party games and so on. They also did Rise of Tribes, and Peter Vaughn was the developer on that project. Peter Vaughn is one of the most passionate developers out there, put his heart and soul into Dwellings of Eldervale, and made it impossible for people to look away when they looked at that Kickstarter. And then Cryo is a Z-Man game, and Z-Man is now a subsidiary of Asmodee, which includes like Fantasy Flight Games and all that. So this is a huge company, and they have their marketing and their design teams and their production and so on. And so I've been lucky that my products, my designs have become products with people who knew how to make it impact the market.
Oh yeah. You're relinquishing control over the things that you're not an expert in. And that's really valuable for any sort of industry that people are in, is sort of knowing where our skill set and everything, the sort of the end of our abilities. But I've seen you talk in the past how you're like, if there's something I want to do, I'm like, oh, of course I can do it, which I feel very similar in that regard. But then knowing your limits is so important at the same time.
Now, maybe I would be a great publisher. So for example, I used to work on cars all the time. I had a 69 Z28 Camaro.
Oh, nice.
I had a 73 Triumph Spitfire. I rebuilt Volkswagen engines. I painted cars. Now I take my car to the shop and somebody fixes it for me, and I have all that time.
Yep.
So we make these different kinds of choices. Sometimes you're choosing not to do something that you totally could do, and instead you know that it's better worth your time to do that other thing that you're passionate about. I much prefer to do the creative design work that I know is going to like at least have the potential to make me money than to try to save a buck by spending all weekend trying to, fix something I could have paid somebody to fix.
Yeah. And then speaking of money, so this is a side hustle for you. It's not your full-time gig. You're the teacher, as we talked about. How do you look at this side of you? Do you still see it as a hobby? Do you see it as almost like a part-time job or a business endeavor? Like, how do you look at it?
That's an interesting thing. I look at it as a craft, as a discipline, as a hobby, and as a pastime. I think to me it is all of those things. It is a side hustle, but side hustle always sounds like you're doing something dishonest, right? Going back to something you said earlier about kind of like patience and commitment. I always tell new designers, because they always are like, how am I going to get my game to do this? Or how am I going to get my game to do this? And I'm like, you're probably not. You need to give up on the idea that this game that you are so passionate about is the thing. You will be a successful designer if your focus is on developing the talents, the skills, and the work habits that will help you know the craft. Because this is a very difficult discipline, and it's a discipline where failure is the norm. Most of the work that we do doesn't work. It winds up on the cutting room floor. And
I think you've said only 10% of what you've worked on actually moves into anything.
Yeah, it's something like that. I forget the numbers at the moment, but I mean, you can look at the stack right here. These are my currently published games, and I think I did the count of 88 games that I've designed.
Wow.
And that includes like different versions of games. And so going back, I think I started designing somewhere between 2011 and 2012 when I very first started designing, and it'd be 3 or 4 years before my first published game. And then it wouldn't.
Real quick, 2011, 2012, it's 10 years for 88 games that you worked through. Yeah. Wow. That just really blows my mind. Yeah, that's a bit.
I mean, it doesn't look like a lot when you look at this, right?
But I would argue it shows. It shows in these games because they are so they're refined. I wish I could speak to more than just Energy Empire and Dwellings. I haven't played Whistle Mountain, Cryo, or Stones of Fate. I actually only discovered when I was doing a little research for our conversation, so I definitely want to check all three of those out. But in Dwellings and Energy Empire, it shows that you've put in the reps. Like, this is, I like to tell people, like, the reason I called this show Starting Now was that it's important just to get started. I've talked to like coaching people and friends and clients and all these things about ideas they've had for years, and they never start because they want it to be perfect from day one. And It's never going to be perfect. We have to put in the reps. Like, when I started developing, I worked on a different team, and we did over 100 websites in 1 year, which, like, looking back, I'm like, I don't know how we did that. It's just crazy. But that was my trial by fire. That's how I figured out the systems and figured out what I needed to let go, what I needed to focus on, and how I could make this happen as my full-time career. So I think it really shines through in your game design that you've had that trial by fire just in things that haven't gone public.
Yeah, and I'm my own worst critic. There are probably games sitting in my prototype box that somebody would have published. And they might have done okay. But I really only want my best work going out there. Now that's a luxury for me, because my whole pursuit here is built on a solid foundation of having a steady career that I maintain at the same time. So I think of that kind of as my, like, that's my launch pad, and everything else is bonus. And so it's okay for me to take the years to do this. I don't have to rush. I don't have to hustle. I do work with people who are in a hurry. And sometimes I'm like, I I can only do what I can do, but I try to meet their deadlines and try to help them, um, you know, uh, hit the marks so that the product can be released on time and so on. But from my perspective, if if the game isn't solid enough, if it isn't interesting enough, and if it doesn't feel like it's fun to work on anymore, I just shelve it and walk away from it. And I can focus my attention on something else that really is going to draw my passion and keep me interested. Because I want to be interested the whole time I'm working on it. And I know that's not always the case.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard interviews with rock musicians where they're talking about by the time we got done recording, we hated that album, and it's like their best album.
Yeah, and then they hit
Because
the tour and just play
Yeah.
these songs in perpetuity forever.
how much iteration it takes to get there, it can be soul crushing. That said, that then motivates you to create something that's really highly replayable. So let me tell you a little about Whistle Mountain, because Whistle Mountain is insane. This game is starting to get the attention it deserves. It got nominated by the Dice Tower for being the most innovative game of 2020. We'll see if it wins that. But and this probably is something you'll want to talk about too, which is I almost always work with a partner. The partner either being the developer that I'm working with or a co-designer. And so Whistle Mountain is co-designed with Scott Caputo. And Scott Caputo has designed a whole bunch of games that are based around tile placement. Basically, taking different shapes of objects and putting them out there to build things. A lot of my work is on different kinds of action selection, usually like worker placement, where you're taking your game piece, putting it out there to take an action, to do a thing, and depending on where you put your stuff, changes what you can do. Whistle Mountain builds a grid of these differently shaped objects. They call them polyominoes, which is like they're rectangular shaped objects on a grid, and this is like a scaffold, and then machines are built on top of the scaffold, and all the while you're flying differently shaped airships and putting them in these different positions around, and depending on how you place your airship, you get a whole bunch of resources. This game explodes in how much you can do on your turns, and it also makes questionable sense about how it all works. It's this wonderful experience where you're getting these workers, you get them into the tower, and the whole time you're trying not to drown because the water's rising, because you're being reckless and destructive, and you're building in this canyon, and you're melting the ice of the Rocky Mountains.
Interesting.
In any case, we come up with these ideas, and when they spark, and we can bounce them off this other person, that's one of the keys to kind of keeping some of these things alive. So I think a lot of the ideas that I have sitting on my cutting room floor, my abandoned projects, are ones where I really tried to go it alone, and trying to be, a rugged individualist doesn't always pay off, because sometimes it's the interchange with that other person, with those other ideas and other opinions, is where the true creativity thrives.
Yeah, between the lines. I mean, that's really, our business works because it's me and my business partner. We've been doing this for over a decade now. We fit together because we have complementary skills. We can do what the other one does, but we're not the best at that. Like, Dave is the designer of the duo. I'm the developer. But then business-wise too, I'm more strategy. He's more in the visual space of what we're doing, but we can both handle the other side. And that is a big part of why I think we've been able to also, like, not just survive, but thrive for so long in a space that is pretty competitive. And it's something that I like to sort of tell people, because people would be like, oh, what's maybe the biggest piece of advice that you have as an entrepreneur? And a lot of times it is finding the right partner also, like not just a partner necessarily, because you need to have the right connection, which is really, it's hard to find. It's not simple, but it's very valuable. And I know Tom Jolly was one of the early people that you partnered with for Energy Empire. How did that go? Because he is a pretty established designer at that point, right?
Tom is a legend.
Yeah.
So he designed Wiz War, Draken Cave Trolls. So his design work goes back to the 80s. Like he was, let's see, I've even heard that Richard Garfield credited Wiz War as part of his inspiration for developing Magic the Gathering.
Oh, wow.
So Tom has been designing for a long, long time. And like me, he's kind of a jack of all trades. He's an electrical engineer. He designs puzzles and rocket nozzles. And these days he spends a lot of his time as an author. And but Tom is also the co-designer for Cryo.
Oh, okay.
So Tom and I work together on Cryo. Tom and I work together on Energy Empire. And Tom and I are actually brainstorming some new ideas on possible new game. So Tom lives in my same town, and I happened to meet him at PolyCon. And PolyCon is Cal Poly San Luis Obispo's annual game convention. And it's one of the oldest conventions in the country.
Nice.
I don't know. I think they're near 40 years at this point.
Wow.
It's almost as old as Gen Con. Yeah, I'm totally blanking on how many years it is. It's been around for a long, long time. So Tom and I met there at PolyCon, and pretty soon we were hitting it off, play testing each other's games. And then he just fell in love with my original rough work for Energy Empire. And I said, hey, want to help me get this? Want to help me finish this? And we did, and we took it to Gen Con, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and that was Drill Baby Drill at that point, right?
That's right. Drill Baby Drill.
Yeah, I love the name.
It's the original name of that game.
But
Thank you, Sarah Palin.
And like you said, then teaming up later with the publisher who put the IP for Manhattan Project on there and stuff, that means a lot. That really has an impact on that initial recognition of what the game could be.
And that lends itself to a key thing for entrepreneurial minds, which is to be in the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. We were play testing that game at KublaCon in San Francisco in May of whatever year that was, 2015, 2016. I'm blanking right now. It was a long time ago already. And so we played that with Seth Jaffe of Tasty Minstrel Games, who's a developer for Tasty Minstrel Games. He loved it. He was super interested in it. He's like, He's like thinking about the game all weekend. We're like, oh, I think we've got him. He's going to be interested. And then we were playing with Aldo Giosi, who worked with it's like a fulfillment distributor type company. And they've been subsumed into what's now Flat River. And he's like, this is good. And he's like, we should make sure that Minion Games sees this, because it's kind of like Manhattan Project. And I was like, yeah, well, I love the Manhattan Project, and I was inspired by this, inspired by that, but I was really trying to make my own game. And so a couple of months go by, and we did meet with Minion Games at Gen Con. And what was hilarious was we took the game to the publisher speed dating event. So publisher speed dating is an opportunity for you to take your game, put it on a table, and everybody around you has their games. And publishers, major publishers, minor publishers are rotating through, and you're giving, I think it was at the time, 10-minute pitches, 7 to 10-minute pitches. But when we walked into the room, we were some of the first ones into the room, and James Matthey, the owner of Minion Games, was running the speed dating. And he said, Luke, put that in my bag. He didn't want any of the other publishers to see it.
Had he played it at that point?
At that point, I don't think he had played it. I could be wrong. We did play it with him that weekend, and we did show it to publishers. We wanted to make sure that, we gave it a chance to let people see it. And sure enough, it went home with Minion Games, and a couple months later, we got it signed, and we worked on some minor retheming, shifting a little away from oil, a little more towards nuclear, and yeah.
How did you build that rapport with him initially, that he spotted you and said, oh, his game's here, I want that?
So we'd been reaching out, communicating via email, but also there was word of mouth already going on about this game. So because we'd been playing in public, because we'd maintained a public presence and an online presence. Everybody knew what we were working on, and everybody knew what we had.
And what did
And
that public
so,
presence look like? Online or just in public?
yeah, by and large, so I do a lot of my designing in public. So I don't post tons on my Twitter, though I do have a lot of Twitter followers. I'll throw out a few nuggets here and there. I put stuff up on Facebook. I share things in some of the groups, some of the design groups on Facebook. And at that time also, it would be running games at conventions. And so you're getting your game into the convention book and getting people to see it and play it. And then they're going and talking about it and doing their social media. So the best way that people find out about it is through that kind of organic nature, where if you've really made something that's going to make a mark and a lot of people see it, they're going to be spreading the word. And that was happening with that game.
Yeah, and it's that action again. You were taking the action not only to develop the best game you possibly could, but also to get it out there and not just sit on it hoping that sort of right place, right time. You were putting yourself in a bunch of places, so the right place was more likely to present itself.
And I left out a big key part because it's becoming almost antiquated approach, which is that myself and about 10 to 12 other writers all put together the League of Game Makers blog. And we wrote about all matter of game design topics for years. We were putting out 3 blogs a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We were chatting constantly on our private Facebook group and discussing our approaches and having great debates at the time. And we pumped out a whole bunch of blogs. And in there, I wrote a lot about my process. So that aspect of writing about my process and doing research about my process and presenting what I was learning as I was going along, I was essentially taking the audience of the League of Game Makers along for the ride as I was learning what I needed to become the designer I was becoming. And so there's a degree of acknowledgement that people knew I was that guy with the League of Game Makers. In fact, we would go to conventions and we'd wear yellow shirts with black logos that said League of Game Makers, and yellow and black. Oh man.
So this is so funny because I feel like we're like kindred spirits with this, because when we were building our company, we did some similar things where our accent color is pink. We were wearing these bright pink shirts with our big logo on it, giving people like these little acrylic necklaces that we made like with our logo. And yeah, but it's just getting out there and getting the word out any way you can. But I just want to touch on what you said about bringing people along for the ride. That is what works. I mean, we want to step into someone else's shoes and experience what they're doing. Like, it's why YouTube is so successful. So many people on YouTube, you have people who are going to Disneyland and Disney World, that's their business. That's their career, because people are like, oh, I wish I could be there right now. Let me watch the latest video. They're there again. Or there's people going through self-development, personal development things, like designer, like whatever it is. And it's such a valuable approach to everyone involved, like to you, because you're building your audience and you're bringing people into the story of Luke and your games and all these things, but also you're educating people as you're learning.
Yeah. So, related to that, and Kickstarter does a lot of that too, from more of a product end. But also going back to the League of Game Makers, I wrote I think it was a 4-part series, and the 4-part series was called How to Design a Worker Placement Game. And I had not yet designed a worker placement game.
Nice.
I mean, I was working on trying to, but there's a little bit of bravado in that I was putting out articles saying, here's how you design a worker placement game, because I was developing kind of a theory for how this can work. And I was walking through essentially the process for building Energy Empire. The first article in there was about games that you should play to familiarize yourself and understand, to do the research and understand how they work prior to starting your own work. And I've seen a lot of folks try to build a worker placement game because they think it's easy. And it is. It is easy to build a worker placement game. I put a worker in space A and I get this. The challenge is making anything that uses that so familiar mechanism that people are going to care about, and for it to distinguish itself in some way. So through that series of articles, I walked through the work that I was doing building Energy Empire. And I did talk also, going back to earlier, that kind of that math approach to how do you balance actions and so on. There's an article that I did where I discussed that, kind of the it's semi-heuristic, semi-mathematical approach to balancing actions out in the design. So yeah, building up the League of Game Makers, going to events as the League of Game Makers, helped establish myself and several other people. Peter Vaughn, who, Dwellings of Eldervale, Tom Jolly, Jeff Cornelius, and Scott Caputo. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some other people, but Christian Strain did a lot of the artwork on Dwellings of Eldervale. He was also in the League of Game Makers. Nice. So that process of kind of publicly engaging in trying to understand game design, game development, and for others, they were trying to understand publishing, helped bring us into the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. Love that approach, and clearly it worked. I mean, that it's established you, and you've refined your skills over the years as a result. So you've mentioned money is more on the publisher side. Like, from a designer, what type of career can someone, I don't want to say expect, but can someone strive for generally that you think is sort of feasible? Like, what are we looking at? Is it going to pretty typically be a part-time hobby, or could someone take this full-time?
I think by and large, as a general rule, the people who can take it full-time are people who they hit an absolute home run with a single design or multiple designs, or they're the kind of designer who really knows how to grind it out and produce a massive amount of work. And they're either freelancing with multiple companies, or they actually go to work as a designer or developer for a specific company. So there tends not to be this idea that you will become a rich and wealthy celebrity with this. I've heard Matt Leacock talk and say that, you know, his lifestyle is fairly modest, but he definitely can get by on his game design work. And he lives in the Bay Area, so I mean, he's got to be doing pretty well to survive anywhere within the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. So I do know some folks who've gone all the way into the industry, and it tends to be some kind of combination of design and development, or working with a publisher. You'll see these people, you know, working the booths and doing community outreach or various other kinds of tasks in addition to the design work. I mean, work in the industry is it can be pretty broad in terms of the skill set, the kinds of things that would go with it. For me personally, I have no intention of becoming a full-time designer, knowing that I'd probably have to go more into something like that, where I'd be developing, where I would, form a partnership with a publisher or something like that. And I'm going to continue freelance design work. That'll probably be the end of my story. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll see how it goes.
But yeah, like you said, it's still a hobby, so you still have the passion for it. And I want to jump back to one thing in a moment, but when it comes to a deal for a game, is that almost like an upfront purchase? Like, we have a documentary, it's called Minimalism. It was it's on like iTunes and all these places. No upfront purchase.
I have seen Minimalism.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
But yeah, so we have it all these places, but then Netflix ended up buying the rights to it. So that's an upfront. They buy it for an
Mhm.
extended period of time. We don't get royalties over time. Then they can renew. When it comes to like the industry for board games, how does that look? Are you doing per sale
Yep.
royalties as an upfront?
Yeah, basically, as far as I know, no one does an upfront purchase of a board game design license. They are royalties based. The manner in which the royalties go are different. So frequently, those royalties are based on percentages of wholesale, and sometimes there will be separate carvings out or different rates for direct sales by the publisher at conventions or from their website or from Kickstarter. So, a huge Kickstarter where the designer has a direct cut of the Kickstarter can be a windfall for a designer. With one of my projects, there was a license that was based on profit. And that was interesting because so basically you would not get paid for a long time. And then once
Oh,
the game
okay.
became profitable, then it really starts coming in.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, oh, we got to reprint, goes back to zero again because that's an expense. And now we've got to get back to profitability again. So that one's a little weird. But it's probably akin to like real estate where it's going to be boom or bust. There's no way to like have a nice, steady, even income off of game design. Even if I pumped out a whole bunch of designs, I'm sure some quarters would be just way higher than other quarters. I mean, some are going to be bone dry and then others you're going to be doing okay. But yeah, there tend to be royalties off of wholesale. So the publisher and distributors can do all kinds of different things that are going to change how much of the product is going to move in a given time. A lot of board games don't last. A lot of board games never get a second printing. So a first printing might be 3,000 copies. It might be 5,000 copies. And so I tell designers you shouldn't expect more than a few $1,000s off of your design. And I saw your eyes there.
Oh, no, yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised, unfortunately, just knowing, I mean, because really these upfront costs to do the print runs. I mean, the publisher is spending, I mean, so just an unimaginable amount of money on a single print run of any size game. And then seeing any profits from that is, yeah, it's difficult. But yeah, it just shows that the passion has to be there because it's not going to be a windfall of money or anything.
I tell people that the investment that I risk is my time. Mm-hmm. As a designer, I'm not really risking any money, even though, I mean, I do spend money going to conventions. I do spend money on, random various things related to building my prototypes and printers and computers and whatnot. But really all that is pretty similar to what I might spend on my ordinary life. And when I think about how much I enjoy the actual design work, I'm not really risking much at all. There does come some stress that comes from, working with people. You could have disagreements, or you can have issues that could arise over decisions about what's going to happen. You can worry about your art becoming a product and what kinds of changes might occur. I think that by and large, I've been lucky in that really good developers have worked on my work, or I've been intimately involved in the development, so it never felt like it really left my hands. And by and large, the games that changed the most from the time that I thought they were done are better. They really were improved through the process of other eyes looking at it. And then the process of converting it and turning it into a product. But that said, along the way, oh man, there's all kinds of things. I mean, there was a point where like Peter and I were up in the middle of the night because our cards, you just couldn't read them. And these icons are no good. And this looks too similar. And this is too dark. we're missing the art for this, and we're missing the art for that, and all kinds of that stuff. So I have gone along for the ride on a lot of the business stuff, and I don't mind participating and contributing, but it also further reinforces how much I don't want to be the person in charge of the business side of things.
Yeah, it's important to recognize that. I mean, because you could just find yourself in a spot doing a lot of things that you do not want to be spending your time doing, especially when it is a hobby. And we sort of touched on it earlier when you mentioned like rock stars, but are you able to still play your games after so many play tests and so much time?
Yeah, I really am. Absolutely. I will sit down and I will play Dwellings of Eldervale anytime. Cryo I just got, and it's frustrating because this game is really best at about 4 players.
Mm-hmm.
And so I haven't been able to get together my group, but I've been working on solo with Cryo. Whistle Mountain I'll play anytime, Energy Empire anytime. Stones of Fate it's such a simple little game that I'm like, I don't know. Like, if you really want to play, we'll play Stones of Fate. But that one's like, it's retired to a degree. Mm-hmm. It's a part of my history.
Well, yeah, and that's the first one too, the first published game. In terms of letting them go when and sorry, I realize I can just talk to you all day about all this stuff, so we'll wrap up in a little bit.
Go for it.
Okay.
I still have about a finger of scotch left.
Oh, nice. Perfect. When it comes to, say, sunsetting or deciding that it's time to move on from a game, because like you've mentioned, I mean, so many, like 88 different revisions of different games you've done, and only 10% see the light of day. How do you know when it's time to maybe take this new idea that you have, like, oh, I would love to have the game do this, and when do you know that, okay, it's not this game, it's a different one?
I was listening to a conversation the other day, I think it was on Freakonomics, where they were talking to that researcher who talks about grit, and I'm totally blanking on her name at the moment, but she was talking about marks of successful people, and successful people engage in metacognition. I have the ability to step back and catch myself of being caught in my own trap of my own thoughts, and I can recognize the sunken cost fallacy and when I've fallen into it. So you're familiar with the McNamara's fallacy or the sunken cost fallacy? Like,
if you could just touch on it a little bit.
We stayed in the Vietnam War because the numbers showed we were winning. And the numbers showed we were winning because we were only counting the things we could count. And when we absorb when we get over involved in what is innumerable or countable, we sometimes lose track of those things that are not. And I've been stuck in a design that I couldn't abandon. And the sunken cost fallacy is the idea that I've put so much into this. It's like the $1,000 car. It was such a good deal, I couldn't pass it up. And then it needed an engine and a transmission and a windshield, and those locks don't work. And pretty soon that $1,000 car cost you more than what you should have spent in the first place. So the sunken cost fallacy can trap people, and they can feel like they're always this close to making their design work, this close to making their project work, or this close to getting that game design to something that no publisher would say no to. And the reality is that we tend to see our work a little better than it really is. So we have to look at our work and say, this looks good, but if it only looks good to me, that's my own pride here. I need to look at this objectively and see, does this really shine? Is this going to shine to other people? Is this going to shine outside of my own little peer group who are all there to support me? I'm fortunate that I have some friends who play test my games who don't care about my feelings.
Yeah, that's really valuable.
And they will crush me in playing my game, and they'll tell me everything that's wrong with it. And I've grown out of being defensive over it, and I've also grown out of knowing when they're wrong. But the reality is that we can get trapped in the dream and the vision of something and lose sight of what it really is. So I'm really, really good at abandoning designs. I let them go. I might even let them go too quickly. But the reason why I'm not afraid to walk away from a design, I tend not to go back to them directly, but I tend to draw from them for future work. So sometimes I see this idea and this idea and this idea, they're all over here in this game, but it doesn't work. But I'm going to go and do this work, and I'm going to pull this one over here, and I'm going to use that for this design. Almost all of these designs draw from something else. Here's a great story. Stones of Fate is a super simple card game where you put a grid down of 9 cards, or it's 9 cards in a normal game, or 12 cards I think you can do. And you are basically kind of like moving stones around and flipping the cards. And it's a memory game. You're trying to remember what was on the card that you peeked at as you play. The entire mechanic for Stones of Fate came from a game that I was designing that was this giant, sprawling, monstrous mess called Age of Prophecy. An Age of Prophecy was this game that was going to have like Greek gods and monsters, and it was going to take place in the Mediterranean in this kind of semi-mythological world, and it was going to take place over like generations or eons or years or something like that. And you were going to predict the future, and the entire mechanics for Stones of Fate was how you would do your prediction of the future. So I took that lonely mechanic and produced a game around it. I've heard that the story of Dominion is similar, that the entire mechanic of Dominion was to draft cards to do something else, that the rest of it got dropped.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's wonderful advice to be able to know that something it's not a failure. Like, you don't have to stick it out. Like you said, the sunken cost fallacy. Like, you don't have to hold on to that one because you learned a lot. Like, you've developed new systems. You've created something new already that is going to influence your future. I think that applies, and that's wonderful advice for anyone, whether it's game design or just entrepreneurship in general, because everything we do just molds who we are in the future and what we're able to create moving forward.
And that's where it's the craft. It's the developing the skills. Let's see. It's Nick Offerman. He plays Ron Swanson on Parks and Rec.
Uh-huh.
So in real life, he really does woodwork. And in his stand-up, at least in one of his stand-ups, he talks about the importance of having a discipline, having a craft, having a discipline. I have a bunch. Behind me, you can see like all this woodwork. I did all this woodwork stuff that's everywhere. I have all kinds of hobbies, like way too many hobbies. So anytime I'm doing one hobby, I'm not doing another hobby, and I'm potentially neglecting other things in my life. But so yeah, Nick Offerman said it's really important to have a discipline. It's that thing you can always go back to, and you can continue to develop it. It can potentially be a lifelong thing that you go with, and it becomes something that can center you and center your work. So you want a nugget that no one else knows about?
Oh, I'm all for that.
So do you remember I told you that sometimes like you build something, some idea, and then you tend to use that in something else? Mm-hmm. Well, Dwellings of Eldervale was a design that Peter and I conceived of in a purely abstract sense and almost a non-mechanical sense long time ago. It's about 8 years ago. And we tried various ways of mechanically creating something that would make it click. And we tried, and that was nice, but didn't quite hit the mark. This was interesting, but it's too different, not right. And eventually Peter and I got busy with other things, working on other projects, other games, and we abandoned Dwellings of Eldervale. And then I was working on a game, and the game was a sci-fi game. And I was working on this sci-fi game with these hexes, and the spaceships are going to be worker placement. And then I was like, these could be dragons. This could be a warrior. This could be Dwellings of Eldervale. And then I took those ideas and I go back and I'm like, Peter, look. And then within a couple of months, we were well on our way to building Dwellings of Eldervale.
That's amazing.
So I'm going back to the work that inspired Dwellings of Eldervale.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is a perfect representation of, I think, all of this, like everything we've talked about, and being able to like sunset an idea that maybe just isn't there, and being able to take the things away out of your life that aren't adding value to you, letting other people handle things. Like, I think this is an awesome conversation. Like, we could keep going. I don't want to take too much of your time. We're already well over an hour.
I don't even know what time it is, so we're good.
Yeah. But
sun's still up. That's all. It's nice out here.
Yeah, that's nice. I'm in Chicago, so it is already nighttime, and it was windy and chilly today.
So I sometimes wonder if any of my projects will be the kind of thing that'll be on the shelves at Target, or would be, have that impact, like a Ticket to Ride or Code Names or Catan or Pandemic. And most of my designs tend to be a little bit heavier and more complex than would fit that. So we'll see in time if that occurs. What's kind of fun is when I hear from really like esteemed designers that they like my work. Like, that is like that's a feeling that's as good as any kind of like financial success. I got to play Energy Empire, for example, with various people who were big name designers. I've gotten to sit down and play games with people like Matt Leacock, and even the people who've become co-designers like Scott Caputo. Like, I'm a fan of his work and he was a fan of mine, and become co-designers. There are people who work in various industries, people who work like for Lucasfilm, or they've worked on Star Wars movies, and they're like super into my games. And I always wonder which of these connections is going to turn into something. You never know.
Yeah, you truly don't. And also, I think why they do turn into things, like for you and for people when they do, it's because you're not asking anything of them. You're bringing this. You're like, oh, I'd love to share this experience with you, whether it's your game, someone else's game, and you're just connecting. Like, that's a big reason why I started this podcast. Was I've wanted a podcast forever. And in 2020, I wanted to reconnect with people I hadn't talked to in years. So I started reaching out to some of my friends, then people who I respect, like yourself, who were doing great work. And I'm like, I'd love to just sort of dive into your approach and your outlook on things, because there's so much that we can learn, and we learn from each other. We learn from the stories that people can tell from their experiences. And it's not going to be, Luke did XYZ, you should do XYZ. It's, this is what you did. Now, what can we pull from there for my own story, for someone else's own story? And I think it's hugely valuable.
That reminds me that I didn't mention anything about Protospiel events. And so, are you familiar at all with Protospiel events?
A little bit, because you've started one, haven't you?
So I've run a few of them. So Celesticon, Pacificon, KublaCon, Protospiels, all in the San Francisco Bay Area. I don't actually live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I just I'm like a satellite Bay Area person. So I drive the 200 miles up there to participate in these events. So essentially what it is you're bringing all these different designers, some of them like well-established, published, some of them just getting started, some people brand new, they have no idea what to expect, and you bring them all together into one big room. COVID makes this difficult.
Yeah.
you bring everybody all into one big room and you all play each other's work. And throughout the weekend, people are combining socializing, playing games, doing work, designing work, criticizing each other's work. Some people give up that weekend. Some people make connections with other people and, start that process of becoming a published designer. And just creating that environment, which is a semi-social environment that fosters creativity, it helps make games better. And it helps make people who make games better, because we are better when we are learning from each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect scenario, a perfect thing to set up for people, because really, yeah, like you said, a lot of the things that didn't succeed for you, you tried to go it alone, and going it alone, we're always better together. Yeah.
Agreed.
But what's something that you're excited for moving forward?
I'm super excited to see Cryo get released really soon. So Cryo is a little different from some of my other work in that it's a tighter game. It's a game where you will make pains on your decisions. Everything has an opportunity cost. It doesn't explode as much as like Whistle Mountain and Energy Empire, where it's like, I'm doing that and that and that and that. It's like, no, you're doing this and you're doing this, and you're regretting not doing that, and you're regretting not doing that. So as a result, we'll see how the audience receives it, but it's the most Euro game I've ever built. And it is the tightest game I've ever built. That said, I think it's very balanced. It's very interesting, and it's absolutely gorgeous. They did a beautiful job. Oh, I can't reach it. It's just a beautiful game.
Nice.
So the artwork is like Mobius inspired artwork. It's kind of like, some of those original drawings that inspired Star Wars and so on. I'm also super excited about this new big project I'm working on, which is a sci-fi game. It's sprawling, and it is the game that inspired Dwellings of Eldervale.
Nice. Yeah, so that's the one that the original design that's what moved over into Dwellings, huh?
Yeah.
Nice.
So we'll see how that goes. I have the luxury that I don't really have to pitch games. Basically, I can say like, hey, publisher, you want to work together on this? And they're like, yes, let's do that. And I have publishers coming to me and saying, hey, can we do something? And I'll say, I don't know. I don't have time.
Yeah. You bring so much to the table. I mean, the games are phenomenal. You're bringing the community. You're bringing so many different aspects. So where should we send people who are listening who want to follow along with everything that you're up to?
So I'm pretty accessible. People can, tag me or look me up on Facebook. I participate in the Dwellings of Eldervale groups. Probably the only place I'm not as good is I'm not on Reddit because I got shadow banned, and I am on Twitter, and I'm easy to find on Board Game Geek also. So I'm happy to talk game stuff, and again, pretty accessible.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like, this was awesome. Like, just an absolute joy to talk to. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care, and it's great being on here. Appreciate it.
I want to thank Luke for joining me on this episode. Be sure to check out his phenomenal board games, Manhattan Project Energy Empire, Dwellings of Eldervale, Whistle Mountain, which I'm definitely going to be checking out very soon, and Cryo, which is his brand new, certain to be hit, I'm sure. But you can also find Luke on all the socials. Again, that's Luke Laurie. As always, this episode of Starting Now is brought to you by Built. At Built, we help you get started online. Whether you want to start a blog or a business, head on over to built.co. That's BYLT.co to get started. Built, your website, built for you, simply. Finally, if you're enjoying this episode and enjoying the show just overall, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. And also, if you're not already watching the YouTube version, head on over to youtube.com/Jeff Sarris. It is my favorite version of the show. I have a multi-camera setup I'm really proud of, so I'd love it if you checked it out, and let me know what you think. And that'll do it again for this week. Again, I'm Jeff Sarris. This has been Starting Now, and I just want you to get out there and get started. We need to dream less, do more. See you next week.